Hi, Jeffrey. Nice to see you again.
Hi,
Would you,
Monica. How are you?
Good, thank you. Would you like to take a minute and introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. Yep. I'm Jeffrey Hoffman. I founded Visible Man, which is a nonprofit focused on suicide prevention for men. Um, we operate a Discord online community that anybody's free to join, and we encourage men to connect there um, and just kind of find companionship, find friendship. Um, Visible Man started several years ago when I was going through my divorce. Um, and I found that a lot of the guys that I had known for several years were going through something similar than what I was going through. And it wasn't until later that I had found out how miserable they actually were. And it was um, it was just shocking to me that we were all kind of on parallel paths, but not really opening up about stuff. Um, and I thought I really struggled um, at the end of my marriage and my divorce. I started to drink more, isolated, and I started to have some suicidal ideation. Um, and I told myself, this was probably 8 or 9 years ago now, that if I make it through this point in my life, and at that point I was really kind of an if, like I hope I make it through this. If I make it through that point, I want to do something so that men have a way to connect with each other, so that I can hopefully pull somebody else out of where they're at. Um, and I realized that there's not really, it's hard for guys to meet each other and be open about things. So I wanted to create a space where we could have professionals interact with them. We could have just kind of camaraderie and friendship. And that's where Visible Man came from.
Yeah, I'm very, very impressed with all of that, which is why I'm so happy I kept in touch with you because what you're talking about is true and it's serious because in my experience as a divorce and trauma recovery coach and a clinical psychologist, I found, yeah, men maybe they feel like they shouldn't ask for help or they don't know they need help or they haven't been socialized to find people to talk to. So I'm really glad you started this and you found your own therapist, which is wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So I wanted to pick your brain some more because
Yeah, by all means.
most of my clients are female, right? Most of my clients are women and they come in and they talk. Well, I do have a couple male clients, but the women come in and they say things. Oh, I'm so confused. Why is my husband, partner, this guy I like acting this way? Um, and so there's a couple topics I want to talk about, and we can just maybe go one by one. And I know there's some things that you also maybe wanted to add. So one thing I hear a lot from women dating, and again, I don't want to overgeneralize to men because women can be like this too, right? And any gender, right? However you decide what your gender is there can be a fear of intimacy. And that fear of intimacy is more psychological. Like I'm afraid to get too close, I'm afraid to open up, I'm afraid to be vulnerable. But I've also heard men tell me it's really scary to be vulnerable. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've experienced it. In fact, just this morning, I had a situation where um, I caught myself shying away from it, from being vulnerable, and it wasn't sexual intimacy or anything like that. It was just emotional intimacy. And one thing that I've realized is that as you know, as a clinical psychologist, there's all sorts of types of intimacy. I used to equate it with just sex, but I think the harder thing is emotional intimacy. Um, because guys, like if you picture just a bunch of lion pups or something like that, the way that men are kind of like that. We nip at each other, we tease each other. I was at a um, I'm kind of jumping around, but I was in a meeting last week with just a bunch of guys, and I started working with one of my friends. Literally, he came in to work with me, and the guys around me started to see me change my behavior, where I would start to, give them a hard time. But that's how men interact. The problem is, it makes it really unsafe to. It makes it harder to open up, I should say, because it's to show vulnerability, knowing that you might get snipped at, even if it's jokingly, is pretty tough. But the situation I was in earlier, I had a conversation with my daughter that kind of resonated with me today, and it was hanging over me. And I talked with my girlfriend on the phone, and I was very deflective. If that's deflective, is that a word? I deflected a lot, and I just found myself kind of saying, "No, we shouldn't get together. No, we shouldn't talk about that. You've got enough going on." It was very, "No, let's just make this about you." And then we hung up, and I was like, "Oh, that's not good. That's not good." That it was very hard for me to say, this conversation really is affecting me a lot, and I don't know what to do. And she's great because she makes it safe to open up. But like you said, I think you said it's a very psychological phenomenon where the emotional safety has to be built over time. And it's way easier to do something that is, I know one of the other things we want to talk about is kind of how men can be reactive, but also avoidant. I think is a reaction to not being intimate. It's easier to do other things that are physical or sexual or things like that, but it's much harder to have an emotional safety.
That's interesting. So I have so many questions after that. So and maybe I didn't catch this right, but you were saying sometimes it's easier to be reactive or avoidant than vulnerable. Is that right?
Yeah, yes. I can expound on that if you like.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
I, at least for myself, have found that I internalize a lot, and when there's not, it builds up, my emotions, whatever they are, and if I'm not in touch with my physical sensations of what I'm feeling, it's much easier to distract myself with something else. But the problem is it just builds up and it doesn't go anywhere. So if I get into some kind of like not even a fight, but just on a confrontation, or somebody challenges me on something, it's a great outlet, but it all comes rushing out. And it's sort of like, I used to have much stronger of a temper where I would just internalize a lot. And as soon as I got angry, it would be on or off. It would be, if I'm off, I appear to be very chill, but anybody who knows me says that I have a look of intensity on my face. And then I would just react. And now I can feel, like I can feel my skin kind of crawl, and I notice myself dropping things and just getting snippy and being like sarcastic and stuff. And so for me, that's like an early indicator that, and I'm really irritated. And it's easier, I think, because it also externalizes it. If somebody comes at you with a challenge, you can focus it on them like a laser, but they didn't deserve it. So it's an outlet, but it's not really the healthiest way.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it's almost like there's a fear of being vulnerable. It might not be safe. And because of that, you're kind of sitting on things, looking chill, but inside it doesn't feel so chill.
Yeah.
And so then as soon as I don't want to say opportunity, because I don't think you see it that way, but as soon as it's like the stress threshold breaks maybe, and then there's a reaction. Okay.
Yeah. And the fear of being vulnerable, it's sort of pervasive. It's really interesting if you read like Reddit comments about what's something that men wish women would know about what it's like to be as a guy. And without fail, one of the top comments is that just like nobody cares. Like it's not true that nobody cares, but it feels like we're out on an island by ourselves. And it takes a lot of patience on whoever your partners, from your partner standpoint, your wife or husband or whatever, to just to craft that space where it's okay to be vulnerable. It takes a lot of practice and intentionality to say, to just hear and create space for somebody's feelings without trying to fix it or without offering a solution. I mean, even so, another example is in the Visible Man Discord server. We're all going through stuff, but I'm not a mental health professional. The guys that are in there are not, and we're all just peer supports. We're all just dudes that are just trying to build each other up. And if somebody comes in and is not, I don't know, in your profession, I'm sure you've seen it, where somebody, you can't really get through to them, and you can validate their feelings, but there's always something else. There's kind of like I feel bad about this. Okay, yeah, but what about this? What about this? What about this? And it's exhausting as somebody who wants to provide support, because you want to just you want them to be validated and be like, oh, okay, I can kind of see your point. So it takes a lot of patience on that part of somebody who's trying to support a guy to just create a space for him. But it pays off though, because I think like with guys, with anybody, it takes a long time to build that trust, but once it's there and you have a safe person, then it can really change your life.
That makes sense, because most people want that, right? It's like, just hear me out. I don't need a solution.
Right. Yeah.
I just want to be validated. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So jumping back on something else you said that men can kind of snipe at each other. Maybe it's banter, right?
Yeah. I mean, you've probably seen it. Like if you have a half a dozen guys just sitting around doing whatever, we'll just kind of rib each other. We'll make fun of each other. And it's sort of like our way of vetting each other. But if people do that, if guys do that, it means that you're brought in. They're trying to bring you into the fold. And yeah, it's if they don't do that to you, if there's 5 guys and you're the one they don't make fun of, you're not quite in the circle yet. It's when they start. It's really kind of counterintuitive, but once they start giving you a hard time, it's sort of their way of bringing you in. And I've noticed that even in the server, but just with any guys, if you chat with them, 99% of what we do is just coexist with each other. If you need help turning a wrench, lifting a couch, watching the game next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, whatever, those things really build trust with men. Just being present with them and not trying to like have a hard conversation about things. But that 1% comes out after you've built that trust. Guys are like that, where most of the time I chat with guys. It's not deep or anything like that, but there's a trust that gets built up. So I live on the Erie Canal, and I live on this. There's anybody's familiar with it. There's a walk path on it, but I live on the other side. So, and because it's not very wide, I can hear what most people talk about on the other side, and most of it's benign, and I can't really hear the words necessarily, but I can hear how often how often each person talks. And what's interesting is to watch a group of women, or like 2 women going for a run, and the tone of voice and how much they talk versus the like 2 or 3 guys going. It's different. And I can't really hear what they say, but you can hear like the tone of voice, and it's just fascinating because women share so much, and it's awesome. I wish guys were like that. And I see like 2 guys, and I'm like, dude, I don't know. It's kind of like I get to be a fly on the wall and witness what women are up against, like in terms of trying to connect with their guy, because it's pretty tough.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I mean, studies have shown women use more words in a day. Their vocabulary is wider because of that, or I don't know if it's because of that. So women think, well, I can share my feelings. I can talk about things. Why aren't you talking to me? Why aren't you opening
Yeah,
up?
yeah.
Not the same.
We we just and a lot of it is social. I mean, I think much of it is because um, you know, we've all met guys where they grew up, frankly, around they have a bunch of sisters or um, whatever. Even not that necessarily, but they have a good emotional vocabulary, um, and they can articulate what they're feeling, and it's not common. It's not common, but I mean, I know guys that are in their 50s and 60s that are like they suck at communicating. Oh, sorry, with my cat. They really just don't have practice. So it's very the thing is it's very learnable and teachable, um, but it does take practice, and so you get to see when you grow up around it, um, and you can practice at it, then you get better at it.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you grew up with a lot of sisters or a single mom or a mom who was
Right.
very vocal, do you think the younger generation is more open?
I do think so. Yeah. Uh, even just, I mean, if you compare it to like the um, older generations, like our grandparents or something, how they spoke about or just didn't talk about it at all, and you just suck it up. Um, versus I cross paths with younger guys, maybe in their 20s, and to take a mental health day is something that is in their vernacular that you wouldn't have expected. You wouldn't have that from a guy in the 70s that, you know, that
Yeah.
worked in a steel mill that was just the prototypical brusque dude, and you've got these guys that are more in touch with going to therapy or medication where they're like, yeah, this is, I talked to my therapist about this last week and blah, blah, blah. And they'll slip into a sentence and it's awesome. It's great because I really do think that it's shifting with the younger generations.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. So on younger generation, I was talking to a male around 23, 24, and he was talking about making other male friends. He's like, it's just weird for me to reach out and text this person I want to hang out with or call them. And I said, why? He mentioned because it's weird for guys to do that. They should be focusing on their career or they should be focusing on their family. Does that resonate with you, or is that just have you heard anything like that before?
It does. I'm smirking because I'm like, oh, dude. It's sort of like I don't know. I feel sad for him, but I also can completely relate because it's not, especially once guys, once you reach your 20s and you're starting to partner up or you start to, you know, maybe get married or maybe have kids later or whatever. Um, the the it's it's much easier for guys to just kind of put their head down, go to work, focus on those things. It doesn't mean that we have any less need for connection or closeness or safety. It's just that it's a really great scapegoat to be like, I got to go to work. And we do. I think we all have that feeling that we want to provide for our families and partners and whatever. Um, but I think I know exactly what he's talking about because there is a weirdness, and it's I don't even know how to describe it, but it's like um, it has to be a very intentional thing. For some reason, like if I got a text from, I'm just trying to think of somebody like, hey, you want to go out and do this together? Yeah, sure. But if it's a guy, it's almost like you're watching like the first day of kindergarten and you're trying to make a friend. This like awkward, like, hey, I will now introduce. It's what it feels like. It's just really kind of awkward, and especially if it's like that direct face, not face to face, but invitation versus we're going to go to the game. There's a bunch of us going. Do you want to go? Or I need help moving something. I don't know how many times I've been asked to move something. Probably I could count them on one hand. But it's like that external activity that guys will happily get involved with shoulder to shoulder. But if it's face to face, so to speak, it's pretty uncomfortable.
Interesting. And last time I talked to you, I think you mentioned something similar about eye contact, and more like easier for men to maybe talk while they're walking or doing an activity instead of this eye to eye like you and I are doing right now.
Yeah, and there have been guys that I've had, I'll say, emotionally intimate discussions, and they're extremely rare. Um, but I have guy friends who I would trust with my life, who um, some of whom I'm never even haven't even met in person yet, but I've talked to them on the phone, on video, voice chat, all that kind of stuff. Um, and there's a trust and love that's there that somehow gets built up over time, even though there's not like this face to face or like, hey, so and so, do you want to go to dinner? Like, I'm imagining being on a date with somebody and like sitting across from them face to face and having like a intimate discussion. Guys don't do that very often, at least in my experience. But we do things together. Back to the canal thing, there was two guys going by on a kayak. Each had a kayak, and their conversation was just wonderfully close and intimate. And they were just two dudes talking, but they were doing something. So I think that helps.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the love is felt and it's known, but it's not necessarily expressed.
That's very accurate. Yes.
And I think that's important for women to understand too, right? So that it's not that they don't care, it's not that they're not hearing you or loving you. It's just, it's maybe too intimate or something like that.
Yeah. And again, I can't speak for all guys. My experience has been that they may feel it, but articulating it in words that you might read in a romance novel or like in a psychology book, where it's like, when you do this, I feel this thing. And I would like it if we could talk about this thing, but I feel scared to talk about that thing. Can we work on that together? But that's not common, I don't think. Um, it can be learned, but articulating it is pretty difficult.
Yeah, I agree. It can be learned. Um, so how do you think political extremism fits into these gender roles?
Um, what I've seen online, and online is a heavy word because I think that strongly influences it, um, is what gets the clicks is the people like Andrew Tate, if you've heard of him, or these extreme. I kind of laugh because I'm almost 50, and so like my perspective on like a mid 20s guy is just different. Um, where like they feel like they need to have a six pack and be like completely muscular and have a yacht and just be like very alpha, like that. Um, and when you're, I think all guys want to feel that way, but it gets heavily. Younger guys are more impressionable, and I think they are. It's easier to draw them into that sort of thinking because it feels good. It feels good to have, somebody's. It's easier to blame women and say, well, leaning towards a misogynistic type of thinking because I feel this way, therefore it's women's fault. It's not. But if you're just online, it's much easier to get the algorithms pull you over to that direction. Um, so I think what I've seen is the last decade is just with people blame social media, but it's kind of true that if your psyche is such that you're impressionable and you want to feel good about yourself, there's a market for that. There's people that make a lot of money off of young men that want to think that way. So it tends to amplify the extremism. And unfortunate is a drastic understatement. Um, is that it's a fairly small percentage of guys, but they get a lot of attention because like imagine. I guess there's more of them probably, but like just average dudes who are just going to work, loving their wife, having kids, and just like that's not very interesting. Like from an algorithmic standpoint, the computer is like, oh, okay, all right. There's millions of you guys like that. But what about the guy that's ripped, or the guy that if he makes fun of or gives his girlfriend a hard time or something like that, but it makes him feel better. That's going to get you the clicks. So from a percentage standpoint, I think the extreme thinking is a fairly small number of guys, but online it gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, I can imagine, right? The loudest person, most showy person.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so last question.
Yeah.
How can we better support men or our male partners or our male friends?
It's a good question. Um, the way I think of it is, so I have a rescue dog, and I had to medicate him before this because he gets very whiny. He was sitting over there whining. He's 80 pounds. He's like 5 years old. He's a bigger dude, but he's very skittish.
Okay.
So if a guy comes to the door with a hat on, he gets very scared if you try to pet him. Not saying all guys are like that, but physically we can appear intimidating, especially if we have a lot of testosterone and we're physically larger. And you would think that this strength equates to um, other areas of our life. We're just as scared. We're just as in need of safety and emotional closeness as any other human. We are literally the same on the inside. Um, I think a lot of us don't know how to ask for it, but even more of us don't even know that we need it. Men often, people turn to sex as like a surrogate for what they think they need. Um, but I think even deeper than that, to be held and to be listened to and validated. And you kind of have to meet us where we're at, because if it's true that our emotional vocabulary isn't as great, we don't even know how to express it, even if we feel it. So um, it may sound patronizing, ironically, to use that word, but to be patient with us as we try to learn how to communicate, and um, validate our feelings. If you notice something small, like to point it out, say, I noticed that thing. I just want you to know that you're important to me, and it looks like there's a shift in your behavior. Whenever you're ready to talk about it, I'm here for you. In the meantime, blah. A very gentle, reassuring, validating support is often what it has taken for me, at least, to open up. Um, uh, when I first started dating again, I found it very shocking that when I would meet certain people that I felt safe with, how magnificent it felt. Because what I was used to was um, even microaggressions, I think they're called. They're like a little sneer, a little catch in your breath, interrupting, a little yeah, but those things are corrosive to the safety of the conversation that I felt. But that's what my marriage was like. Afterwards, when I realized what it's like to have somebody just listen and look you in the eyes and validate you and go, oh yeah, that really sucks, and just leave it at that, it built up my confidence and safety. So I think being patient with us, um, noticing things and pointing it out, and just gentle, safe reassurance, I think will eventually get us to open up.
That is really great. I really appreciate your time, Jeffrey, and this conversation. It was wonderful. And
Absolutely. Thank you for
yeah,
having me.
yeah, anytime. Yeah, I hope we can continue this conversation again.
Me too. I always learn something, and I always think it's a extremely important topic to talk about. As you know, male suicide rate is very high, and men have a lot to learn. I think we're improving, but I think discussions like this will help.
Yeah, we need to be very cautious of male suicide, right? Because
Yeah.
it's an impulse. It can be very impulsive, and it's too late. So I really appreciate you bringing that awareness to society and the community.
Absolutely. Happy to help.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I hope you have a good day.
You too, Monica. Thanks.